We are recording.
Great. So my name is James Pepper. I'm the chair of the Vermont Cannabis Control Board. Today is November 30th, 2022. It's 1 o'clock and I call this meeting to order. Hope everyone had a restful Thanksgiving. The board did not meet last week, though that certainly didn't stop us from getting some good work done. We have some new guidance documents posted to our website, but Kyle is going to walk us through those later today. A huge thank you to our licensing and compliance teams for hosting a live Q&A session last week. And thank you to everyone who joined and brought their good questions and kept the discussion civil. No one has really figured out how to regulate their cannabis markets perfectly right out of the gate. Every state takes a different approach with respect to their laws, their market structure, their testing protocols, etc. This inevitably means that there's a steep learning curve and some confusion, both among regulators and licensees at the outset. And we really do need to learn from each other. We provide guidance where there's ambiguity, and we are continually assessing what's working and what's not. I think the Q&A session seemed very productive in achieving these goals. The recording's available at our YouTube page, and we are actively discussing internally when and how to do more of these. We have a lot to get through today, but I would like to take a moment to note that tomorrow is World AIDS Day. People living with HIV were some of the earliest advocates in speaking truth to power about the therapeutic effects of cannabis. I know in Vermont, we would not have a medical program and likely not an adult use program without this community's determination and sacrifice. Thank you for all the bravery and hope you share with the world every day. A quick administrative note. We have a new rule waiver request form. As a reminder, the CCB built a little bit of flexibility in designing our regulations to reduce or waive certain requirements on a case-by-case basis. This new form is an effort to centralize and streamline the waiver request process. It's available at ccb.vermont.gov/rule waiver. Moving forward, all waiver requests other than packaging waiver requests must be submitted through this form. Packaging waivers have a unique set of circumstances and considerations and still need to go through the packaging form that's available on our guidance page. I would just add a word of caution. The CCB spent a lot of time contemplating whether each and every regulation was in service to our core mission. So our granting a waiver to any regulation has been and will continue to be the rare exception rather than the rule. So other than that, just need to approve the minutes from our last meeting on November 16th, 2022.
So moved.
Seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Kyle, I think we're turning to you now for some guidance walkthroughs.
Yeah. All righty. Load this up. So I'm just going to walk everybody through the what can I do with my cannabis 2-pager that we put out on our website last week. I think it's important for every one of our licensed folks, whether it's a cultivator or retailer, understands what they can and can't do, at least at a 30,000-foot view, with their respective license. And I know that there's been some questions or some confusion that's come out of some of the words that we've used on this 2-pager. And I think it's important to remember, these words are intentional. A lot are in our definitions, in our rules or in statute. So let's start with the cultivator license. Cultivator licensees may grow cannabis plants either outdoor, indoors, or a mix of indoors and outdoors. Cultivators may also dry cannabis, package it, create pre-rolls out of flower and or trim, and sell it to other cannabis establishments. They may produce clones for sale to other licensees, including licensed retail establishments. I know there's been some questions about that. People have seen clones at retail establishments. That is perfectly fine. Cultivators may not conduct any extraction, including mechanical extraction. This means extraction by means of mechanical or manual sifting and pressing as approved by the board. This includes sifting for keef. You need to get a manufacturer's license if you want to do that intentionally. If not, it's going to end up in your trim and you'll package it in your pre-rolls or however else you decide to work with your trim product. You may also not possess cannabis products. Now, I think that there's been some confusion around this. Folks need to remember that cannabis and cannabis products are two different things under our regulations. Cannabis in and of itself implies through our regulations flower or pre-rolls. Cannabis products means that flower has undergone some other type of process or extraction and is a little bit more concentrated. And I know that there's folks out there that are wondering, hey, I'm working with a manufacturer to turn my flower into a manufactured product. Why can't I take repossession of that as I look to distribute it, to retailers? And one, that's a business arrangement that you can make with a manufacturer to kind of move that product for you or on your behalf. You can still carry your brand name, your label, your branding, whatever you want to call it, on that product that manufacturer has in effect turned into a cannabis product for you. And this is on par with how every other state more or less treats cannabis products. You're required to either do that or seek an additional license, a wholesale license or a manufacturer license to take repossession of those cannabis products. And this was the legislative intent, if you look through our statutes, of how the legislature thought that this supply chain would work in a linear fashion. I think, we all know, both folks listening and us at the table recognize that this is not always a linear supply chain. And as we update the legislature on how things are going, I'm sure we'll have conversations to see if any adjustments to that cannabis product and who can possess them, if any adjustments should be made. But I just want to make folks aware that a product and flower are two distinct things under our regulations.
Can I make just add something to that?
Absolutely.
When we say they may not possess cannabis products, that means under their license. It doesn't mean that the person can't separately participate in the cannabis market as a consumer.
Absolutely. You're welcome to participate as you so desire, so long as you're 21. And as I said, cultivators may make arrangements with manufacturers to have the cultivator's label put on cannabis products that are manufactured with the cultivator's plant material. And if you want more information, this is a live link. You can go look at our rules that kind of further elaborate on this, 2.3, 2.4, and 2.5, in addition to the statutory charges and that legislative intent with which we interpreted to create these rules. This is not the time for questions, but thank you. Wholesaler license. Wholesaler licensees may purchase cannabis and cannabis products from other licensees and sell them to licensees. They may package cannabis and cannabis products and may create pre-rolls out of flower and or trim. They may not sell to the general public. Testing laboratory license. Testing lab license. Okay. I'm sure I'm not getting ahead of myself. Testing laboratory licensees test cannabis and cannabis products obtained from a licensed cannabis establishment, dispensary, or a member of the public. All cannabis and cannabis products sold must be tested in accordance with board rules. Testing laboratories test for product potency and purity across a variety of metrics. They may not sell cannabis to the general public or to other licensees. And again, if you have any questions, these are live links. You can do your own investigating as to what we specifically say in rule and look to the legislature and their intent as we interpreted it. A manufacturer license. Manufacturer licensees may create products from cannabis plants, including edibles, oils, tinctures, and other such products. There are 3 tiers of manufacturing licenses depending on the type of extraction methods used and amount sold. Tier 3 manufacturers may use any lawful method of extraction, including supercritical CO2 extraction, flammable solvent chemical extraction, and flammable solvent chemical synthesis. Tier 1 and Tier 2 manufacturers may use the following extraction methods. Mechanical extraction, as I talked about previously, water-based extraction, which is extraction using only ice, water, or other freezing substrate or process as approved by the board. Food-based extraction using propylene glycol, glycerin, butter, coconut, or olive oil, other type of cooking fats, or alcohol as approved by the board, or heat and pressure-based extraction. Manufacturers can package their products and sell them to other cannabis establishments. Again, they cannot sell to the general public. A retailer license. They purchase cannabis and cannabis products from other licensees, and they may package and sell cannabis and cannabis products to the general public. Only retail licenses and the retail portion of integrated licenses may sell to the general public. Last but not least, our integrated license, they may engage in activities of each of the license types: cultivation, manufacturing, wholesale, testing, and retail. And these licenses are only available to an applicant and its affiliates that hold a medical cannabis program dispensary registration on April 1st, 2022. So, that's really it from this 2-pager. We're hopeful this kind of gives folks who have any outstanding questions about what they can do some type of clarity. I recognize it's pretty high level, and questions as they continue to arise, we'll respond to them. I think it's important to note also that a cannabis establishment refers to any of our license types. Cannabis establishment is not just a cultivator, it's not just a retailer, it's not just a manufacturer. It's kind of a general term that we use in reference to anybody who's licensed by the board. So that's it for that. Brandon, do you want to do the bulk flower?
Sure.
Great, thank you.
So as the chair mentioned, at the outset, we had a Q&A session last week after hours that some of the CCB staff participated in. There were a number of great questions that came up at that event. As the chair mentioned, it is recorded and it's available on our YouTube page, so feel free to check it out. One of the questions or issues that came up quite a bit in that session had to do with registering flower and the nuances of registering flower. So it was clear that we needed to provide a little bit more clarity about registering flower, and in particular registering bulk flower. So we put together a guidance document that tries to clarify these questions a little bit, and I'll just pull it up and go through it quickly. So essentially there are 2 ways to register your flower. As we've described in the product registration process, typically all different types of product need to have their own separate product registration. This gets a little bit tricky with flower. So if you are pre-packaging your flower, each different strain or cultivar of that flower has to be under a separate product registration. Again, if it is pre-packaged for retail sale. One of the nuances that came up during the Q&A session is cultivators who are registering their own flower. And if you're a cultivator that wants to pre-package and brand your own flower and also register your pre-rolls that are made with the same cultivar or process lot as the flower that you're packaging for retail sale, you can submit one registration application for both your prepackaged flower and your prepackaged pre-rolls, as long as you include in your registration application the different packaging that you'll be using for both your flower and for your pre-rolls. So if you take a look at our website, the product registration page, there are instructions for how to include information about your packaging requirements. So as long as you include that information about the packaging for both the flower and the pre-rolls, you can submit one registration application for both. So that is pre-packaged and branded flower. The other thing that's happening is that retail shops are carrying bulk flower. And that bulk flower is changing relatively frequently based on how many people are coming in to buy it, but there's quite a bit of turnover, I think, with the different strains of flower that retailers are getting in. So in an effort to make it an easier process for retailers to carry and sell bulk flower, we're only requiring that bulk flower have one product registration. So any retailer that wants to have a bulk flower program, sell bulk flower, only has to submit one product registration for that bulk flower program. So retailers can sell any cultivar that comes from any cultivator under that one product registration. So what we're asking for retailers to do if they want to sell bulk flower is to submit a registration application for their bulk flower that includes the proposed packaging for their bulk flower, a warning label, and an initial certificate of analysis. And then they have to sell that flower in a child deterrent reusable container that complies with all of the relevant packaging and labeling requirements. Many retailers are already doing this, providing reusable bulk flower containers and offering customers to bring them back for refills. The CCB is really encouraging retailers to do this as long as that container reuse program contains the following elements, which I will go through here. So
I was just gonna say,
Yeah.
and very quickly, Bryn, just for anybody who may be slightly confused at the term bulk flower, this is deli style packaging. I think we're trying to move in a calling it bulk flower direction and away from deli style, but just for anybody who's maybe not caught on to that yet, just wanted to clarify.
Yep. So bulk flower is really when retailers receive flower from a cultivator or from a wholesaler and are packaging it at the point of sale. That is what we mean by bulk flower. So if retailers want to have a container reuse program for their bulk flower, they have to ensure that their containers that they're providing for their bulk flower meet the requirements of the rule, including that the container be child deterrent and maintain that child deterrence with reuse. Retailers can only refill containers that they originally supplied to the consumer for bulk flower. When a consumer purchases bulk flower, the retailer has to provide the cultivar name, the potency information, and the COA for pathogens and pesticide residues that correspond to that specific bulk flower that the consumer purchased. And then to ensure the integrity of the child deterrent container, retailers would have to make sure that the container that the customer brings back is still child deterrent. And if it's not, they have to replace the container or a portion of the container so that it remains child deterrent. And then lastly, the retailer has to ensure that the warning label on the container is still legible when it's refilled. And if it is not legible, replace it. And the board plans to conduct retail inspections to ensure that retailers are operating in compliance with the guidance for their bulk flower registrations. That's it.
Great. Any questions or comments for Bryn?
Just very briefly, I know a lot of folks have moved in a packaging direction, utilizing the one child deterrent bag for flower that we've allowed or granted a waiver for. And so something to think about for retailers that are interested in doing this, if you sell flower in that bag, after it's been torn and ripped and used that first time, it loses its child deterrent capabilities, if you read the definition of child deterrent. So again, I'm always encouraging folks to move away from our waivers and into glass packaging. I think it fits perfectly with what we're trying to do here. I'm sure folks that have used these bags, consumers that are bringing those bags back to the store, may just want their bag to be refilled. But we're going to have to see in a plan that you submit, as Bryn mentioned, how you intend to, meet that child deterrent with those bags. Those bags are designed to break down easily. For use or two, the bag's going to start falling apart. I don't know if they're engineered to do what the bulk flower intends to do, and it's really hoping folks can figure out a way to move beyond that waiver, which will go away eventually unless we reauthorize it and move towards other types of packaging and start really focusing on reusing a lot of the packaging that's out there. That's all I got.
All right. So next on the agenda is a walkthrough of proposed rule changes. I'd just like to say a few words before we start this process. what has been happening is every time we have a public comment session or anytime we kind of notice something about our rules that isn't working or could be improved upon or needs to be changed, David, our general counsel, keeps track of those. We intend to update our rules every year, to keep them current, to keep them relevant, to keep them useful. What we're going to do today is review the changes that David has been keeping track of. This is not this is the starting line of our rule change process. I know that, whenever we kind of reopen a rule and, it feels kind of like it's going to be there forever, it's etched in stone. It's not the case. And this really is going to be a continuous iterative kind of process. And I don't know, David, I know I didn't ask you in advance, but maybe you could kind of talk about at the appropriate time what the next steps in the administrative rule processes are, Procedure Act, so that anyone who's listening can understand where we are when we decide to reopen a rule.
Yeah, I'll do that right now, and then we'll jump into the edits, if that makes sense. So I can keep it brief. I mean, there's a series of filings that we have to do in order to promulgate a rule, in order to make a rule become a real regulation that has the force of law. One of the procedures, though, or one of the steps in those filings is that we are required to get public comment. And those of you all who are listening who were involved with this earlier this year will remember that. There's a huge amount of public comment at that time. I'm sure we'll have more this time. The board welcomes it. The board made a lot of changes as a result of those public comments. So as you go through, just remember, this is the first draft. There are going to be more changes, and there's going to be a lot of opportunity for public input, both through our portal on our website, or we'll have a meeting where there will be opportunity for people that'll be dedicated to just receiving verbal public comments that people want to make. So there's going to be a lot of time and opportunity for input, and that's required by law. The board can't not do that. So that will be happening. And I don't know exactly when, but I'd expect that that'll probably be early February. And the public comment period has to extend for 30 days, so there will be time. But I expect that 30-day period will be somewhere around, like, starting in late January. So anyway, that's a little overview. And I'll jump in.
Today's like soft. In light of that, you may see things you like, may see things you don't like, other things that we should change. Don't feel like if you don't get your comments in at our 10-minute public comment session at the end of this meeting that they won't be heard. It may be better that you submit those written or in our meetings that are designed specifically to go over public comment. So.
That's exactly right. So we're closer together.
All right, so as you'll see as we're going through this, some of these changes are substantive changes that I think will have an impact. A lot of them are not particularly substantive. They're really technical things, but we'll identify that as we go through. So the first one you'll see, this is really a technical change. Employee, this definition was intended to apply only to the positive impact criteria section. Having it here potentially introduce some confusion about who is required to get the employee ID cards. We didn't intend to do that. So anyway, technical change here. That definition is still in the rule, but its place has been changed. Outdoor cultivation definition is changing. I would say this is more of a substantive change. So I'll just read out what the proposal is. Outdoor cultivation means growing cannabis in a manner that does not use artificial lighting, provided that outdoor cultivators may use the minimum amount of artificial lighting necessary to keep photoperiod plants in a vegetative state. Artificial lighting for outdoor cultivation must not extend beyond May 1st in a calendar year or past when the specific cultivar can sustain vegetative growth under natural sunlight, whichever comes first. And also I should say, you guys pipe up whenever. So moving on to the social equity section, these first couple edits are really just making explicitly clear something that the board has, this is how the board has applied this rule and has interpreted already, but I think we're just sort of clarifying, which is that incarceration really means in a jail or prison facility subsequent to sentencing. So pretrial detentions aren't, will not count and don't count currently. The board has interpreted incarceration to mean what this says, but we felt like it made sense to clarify by putting this in the rule. There's a number of tiny little changes here around making sure the sections all agree. This subsection, new subsection or subdivision 2 here, I would put this more as a technical change. This is really just making clear that an individual who meets any of the 3 criteria up here could constitute an owner for the purpose of comprising a social equity business. And so there's a little bit of a gap there that was not intended. And we've been interpreting the rule to mean this, but again, this is really just making explicitly clear that any of the 3 ways in which you might be a social equity applicant mean that that counts towards the ownership stake in a social equity business. So one of the areas of social equity that's been a point of discussion, and I think it's fair to say some confusion over this initial period, has been the 3rd social equity criteria, which says that if you're from a community that's been historically disproportionately impacted by cannabis prohibition, and you're able to demonstrate to the board that you were personally harmed by that disproportionate impact, then you could be a social equity applicant. So with the changes here, we are trying to clarify what this means. And I think this is a significant change. I would also say that in many ways, it really is just trying to put on paper how the board has interpreted this again. So I'm not actually sure that its impact is going to sort of change who makes it through this gate, but I think it's just trying to clarify what was intended when this was originally written. So there's a slight change there around the long-term consequences, sort of trying to state that a little more plainly. I think the bigger piece obviously is this new paragraph that says, for the purposes of this subsection, community includes but is not limited to a person who spent the majority of their youth prior to turning 18 in a household that was eligible for FDPIR or that received SNAP benefits. And FDPIR is essentially the equivalent to SNAP benefits, but it is for individuals on Indian reservations. I didn't finish out that sentence before I started saying that, or that receives SNAP or lives in a household that is eligible for or that receives SNAP benefits currently. For the purposes of this subsection, community does not mean professional or civic associations, social organizations, clubs, advocacy organizations, or hobbyist groups. A prior association with cannabis is not by itself sufficient to constitute community. So again, we're trying really to clarify what the intention was here and in fact clarify how the board has been interpreting this. I think, the board has stated publicly some of these concepts already, and we're just trying to put them in the rule itself so that we can have more clarity and individuals trying to understand what is a complicated piece of the rule can understand it more easily just by reading the rule. The applicability section, this is a bit of a substantive thing. So the legislature in the most recent session, earlier this year, did give to the board significant authority to, regulate hemp-derived products. And so this clarifies that, persons who engage in the transfer or sale of hemp-derived products that contain more than 1 milligram of THC per serving are subject to this rule. Thank you. Sorry.
fact that we all have the same cough is a testament to how much time we spend together.
All right, I'll get through this eventually. So this section is really the clarification, excuse me, lost my voice entirely. This was always how we've interpreted this, but again, clarifying a crop has to be, the entirety of the crop has to be within 2 spans. That was for mixed cultivators. This is, again, how the rule's been interpreted, but supercritical CO2 extraction is not something that's permitted for a tier 2 manufacturer. I also deleted the word unapproved. So there's never an intention to routinely carve out exceptions for tier 2 manufacturers. It was just, this is the stuff that's reserved for tier 3. This is a substantive change where tier 1 outdoor cultivators could have an easier path to moving up a tier, to a higher outdoor tier, I should say. This is a bit of clarification around escrow, just clarifying that it needs to be a third party that's holding the account. We got rid of the word bond because I think it was confusing. Nobody's used it when we were asked what we meant by that. I don't think we were really able to explain it all that well. So, and I don't think we had clarity on why exactly that was in there. That term is usually used in relation to like securities and things like that. And so it didn't make a lot of sense. Obviously, we will take public input if somebody had an idea for what that, how that may have been fit in there. This is where that employee definition landed here, because this is what it was intended to apply to. One thing that is a substantive change here, for retailers, a plan to pay the applicable taxes on behalf of medical patient registered pursuant to where they need to be registered may count toward one of the criteria that they would otherwise need to meet in this section. And this is that positive impact criteria section, as I just said, that licensees need to meet if they have more than a certain number of employees. This isn't a particularly substantive change. It just made sense to restate this given the sort of new board responsibilities around CBD and hemp-derived products. And to say a little bit more about that, the legislation did require the board to come up with a plan for dealing with those products in the new year in January. So that'll be presented publicly into the legislature at that time. But that does not, there isn't currently anything. If people are wondering and you haven't seen it, it's because it doesn't exist at this time. This is a change to acknowledge that the $50,000, this is really a statutory requirement that had to be accomplished by October 1st of this year. And that is passed and behind us, so it didn't make sense to keep that in the rule. Or I should say, it didn't make sense to have that specific piece in the rule. The plan to contribute will remain as one of the things that should be there. Yeah, and this is us putting into the rule the ways in which the board has been interpreting the rule. So for overcoming a presumptive disqualification, a person will be deemed qualified if the board finds that granting them a license will not pose a threat to the safety of the legal cannabis market or the general public. And that's really the framework within which the board has already been operating. But it made sense to just state that plainly so folks know what the bar is. The general public knows what the bar is that needs to be met. Lots of things aren't changing, as you can see. So we had a provision in there regarding change of location or change of license control. And some of the sort of specificity and tightness of the rules around this is to make sure that there is no violation of the one license per type rule, which is really like one of the key aspects of the legislation as it was designed by the legislature. And we wanted to make sure we held that closely. But as experience has taught us that it doesn't necessarily make sense in every case to require a full-on license renewal for every possible change in control, because there are some very small ones that where it doesn't make sense to do that. So this is just acknowledging that and saying we're not going to do it in every case, but everybody still has to notify us when they are going to have a change of control. Yeah, so let's go to this, and I'll open this up for board discussion. There had been some interest, excuse me, among the board members in thinking about the waiver provisions. So if you want to have a quick discussion now, and I can pull up the provisions, or have this in a way where you can see both the list and the provisions. But yeah, I will open up the discussion for you guys.
So just for the purpose of orientation, you know, these are the Rule 1 waivers that we wrote into our rule that waive specific aspects of our regulations if you are a Tier 1 cultivator, whether that's indoor, outdoor, or mixed. We took significant public comment about which regulations are not necessary for Tier 1 cultivators. We tried to capture them in this section. And now I think is the perfect time to reopen that discussion now that we have a little bit of experience under our belt. So are there any in particular?
Yeah, I'm just reminding myself which sections align with which numbers.
So these are the first two right here, G and H of 1.4.2.
Oh, okay.
And let me know if you want to skip down.
So it seems like upon renewal, we would want people to put in their renewal application a description of any criminal action or a description of any civil action, particularly if it's happened since they were licensed. I mean, they do have a responsibility to keep us informed, but it should be part of the renewal process.
I'm fine with that. I actually, when in reviewing this, couldn't remember our rationale for waiving those, other than we didn't want to necessarily re-traumatize someone. But yeah, and so maybe it is that we say that you have to give a description of anything that's happened since the issuance of your
Yeah,
license.
that would make sense.
That sounds good.
I think at least it's, you know, majority of those waivers that are in there are from 1.4.4, which are compliance and management plans, and just something I know I'm thinking about. I think we waived a lot of those to try and capture as many folks. I shouldn't say the word captured, bring along as many folks as we possibly could, get them licensed, get them growing, get their products into the market. And I think, you know, one of the things that I feel is important, and I hope everybody who is listening also feels similarly, is now that you know, some are getting their licenses today, but we've had some licenses that have been granted for 4, 5, 6 months, is looking at your business and how do you get smarter and start planning for the long term as a business. And a lot of these waivers, me feel as though they're the beginnings of a compliance plan, a business plan, you know, how you look to make sure that also feels similarly is now that you, sorry, that was distracting. how you're looking to move forward as a business, whether you're trying to grow up a tier or, you know, just make sure you have long-term viability, and what that means to you. So I think, you know, I don't necessarily want to imply, I want to strike all of those waiver provisions without further conversation or discussion, but I think it's worth noting that we want folks to, you know, continue to find success. And that's not just success on that first initial sale that you may have already made, but how can you keep the success as this market starts to mature?
So can we look at those, David?
Yeah, sorry. Here's 1.4.4. It was everything but D, I think, was waived here.
Yeah, it seems like A, once somebody's got a year under their belt, should have a plan for disposal of inventory. They have 125 plants. We'd like to know where it's gonna go if they decide not to continue to operate.
So are you suggesting that that only apply to
Renewal.
renewal?
Yeah.
Not to,
Yeah.
not to initial licensure?
Yeah, I'm focused. I think that makes sense to me. I think if we're thinking about renewal or we've made it, I think, you know, through what we've already talked about, a little easier for folks to move up a tier from an outdoor tier 1 to a different tier. Obviously, these waivers wouldn't apply, but I think even on renewal, getting folks thinking this way, if that's in their 2-year, 5-year plan, you know what I mean? You know, compliance and management plans and business plans are important for anybody to maintain their business.
Yes, I have been thinking about this in terms of renewal.
So would you be wanting to have all of these kick back in for renewal? Upon, like, for a renewal of a license?
Yeah,
You'd
except
wanna
for
have-
B, which is a submitted timeline for beginning of operations. But yes, I think so.
Okay.
I feel like, you know, some of it, and I don't know how we word it, I feel like some of it's contingent on whether or not that tier 1 outdoor cultivator has any employees, because we waived a lot of overviews of, unless I'm looking at the wrong numbers, like E, F, G, we waived all that. Folks may have hired somebody to help them between licensure and now. I think we'd want to see that, but that might be understanding on renewal who is working for your business, if it's anybody but yourself, right?
Yes.
Unless I'm,
No, I
mistaken.
think that's right. I think that's right. I mean, if it's a sole proprietorship, we wouldn't need any of that information.
and I don't think that's too much of a lift for, I would hope that's not too much of a lift for our small cultivators, but I think what it can help do if folks approach it the right way is starting to get smarter as a business, as we want them to succeed.
Okay.
That was helpful, David, in terms of turning.
No,
it
I
into something
think-
tangible.
I
We've
think-
been at it over the last year and a half, so.
I can put it into words.
I mean, one thing that we're seeing that for C, a test they'll comply with applicable municipal ordinances, is that there is a lot of confusion as to what, both on the municipal side and on the licensee side, as to what's applicable municipal ordinance, what's legal and what's not. So I'd hate to have someone attest only to find out, hey, like, what we thought at the time is not what we think now. You
So
know?
maybe we should leave that one.
I think we should leave that one out for
Okay.
tier 1.
And just to be sure that I'm clear, so we're leaving these the same for initial licensure. We're talking about renewal, but even for renewal, BMC will not be required.
I think that's right.
Okay,
We'll take public comment,
I have no doubt.
see how folks feel about that. And some of it could depend on any statutory changes too, right? That might happen in the
That's true,
legislature. Let's
yeah.
say the legislature does decide that all outdoor cultivators can be
And
simple stuff,
And then
kind of
much
create
could
some tax there too.
are we creating a Frankenstein monster here
I mean.
between initial and?
Is this
Maybe.
unmanageable?
I'm just thinking about how long it may take us to change the application. And it may take longer than how long it's gonna take to get these rules amended. But that doesn't mean we can't do it. Just mean,
Well, let's keep that in the back of our minds when we start making determinations between initial and renewal. Because I think
Yep.
that's where the complication will come.
Okay.
Yeah, and again, I think this is from my perspective, hoping to help people get smarter as a business. We all know that business and technical assistance in the cannabis space is hard to come by, at least right now. So anything I feel like we can do to ask people to think that way, I think would benefit folks upon renewal in year 2, 3, 4, and do whenever.
So then the next one is the escrow requirement in 1.4.5B, which right now just doesn't apply to tier 1. Keep it the same or?
Yeah, I mean, I think so.
Okay. I think the next ones we'll get there eventually, are the wastewater requirements. Yeah, it's these two. The letter certifying the capacity to both provide the water and deal with the wastewater. A and B. And then these are exempted only as to home occupancy businesses.
I think I'm fine leaving that as is.
Sounds great. All right, so that's rule 1.
You want to take a break?
Let me get a couple more cough drops to make it through rule 2. Sorry. Oh. Please. That might be enough.
While you're pulling that up, I'll just say one more time that this is not final. These are the things that we've noticed, we've heard about the most. And throughout the kind of next stages of this process, we have ample opportunity for people to bring new rule changes to us. They can be included in this year's amendments. You know, if people want to see other things waived for tier 1 cultivators, you know, there'll be plenty of opportunity for people to kind of provide that information to the board and can be included in our kind of this coming year's rule amendments.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's good to point out. Your comments don't need to be specifically tailored to the changes we're trying to make. You can suggest things as well.
That's exactly right. All right, so in rule 2, got some definition changes here, or additions really. Defining clone means plant section from a female cannabis plant, not yet root bound, growing in a water solution which is capable of developing into a new plant. Distillate means a concentrate where a segment of cannabinoids from an initial extraction are segregated through heating and cooling with all impurities removed. Full spectrum means a cannabis concentrate product or infused product that is derived from a cannabis concentrate, contains cannabinoids, aromatics, essential vitamins and minerals, fatty acids, protein, chlorophyll, flavonoids, and terpenes, and has not been reformulated or has not had cannabinoid isolates or distillates added to it. The harvest lot definition has changed, although again, as you'll see, a theme of this is that a lot of these changes are really just sort of modifying how the board has been interpreting and enforcing this stuff already. And that is true here too. Harvest lot means cannabis grown in the same manner. Whoops, that is a typo. Sorry about that. So what this is going to say is harvest lot means that basically that first sentence just shouldn't be there. I don't believe. I'm going to check with Carrie, our compliance person, but I think this is a copy paste problem. But the basic concept is that to meet the criteria for a single harvest lot, a given lot of cannabis would need to be on the same flowering, fertilizer, and pesticide application schedule. Single harvest lot may contain one or multiple cultivars of cannabis. So it is different than what it was before, which was, yeah, it was defined differently. This is how it is currently being applied. And I will confirm to make sure that this is what Carrie had intended on this piece. But That is harvest lot. Oh, Carrie, maybe we should allow for
Larry, you want to jump
I
in?
was just gonna give you a thumbs up, David. That looks good. That's
Oh,
what we
great.
need.
That's good news. Thanks, Carrie. I lost confidence there. Isolate means a cannabis concentrate that is more than 98% comprised of a single cannabinoid compound created by a chemical process. And then this outdoor cultivation change, which is the same thing that I just read in the prior rule, so I won't reread it, but we changed the definition of outdoor cultivation in everywhere. Process lot means whole or partial harvest lots that follow different paths towards market or diverted into waste. For example, a single harvest lot would be broken into 2 process lots if half was sold fresh, frozen to a manufacturer, and half was dried, cured, and sold as bulk flower to a retailer. Tincture means a solvent such as alcohol or glycerin infused with cannabis. A tincture may include additional plant material. Tinctures may be sold in any volume, but the total milligrams of THC per container must not exceed 500 milligrams. And then this was changed to reflect that change in Rule 1 that states that hemp-derived products with more than 1 milligram of THC per serving are required to get licensed pursuant to Rule 1. And this just allows that to agree. So these changes up here are to the tiers are mostly just correcting errors where the tiers had been not put in correctly in the original rule. They didn't meet the legislation, or they didn't match the legislation, I should say. So now they match the legislation. And then tier 1 manufacturers and tier 1, or the one change, I guess, is that tier 1 manufacturers were dropped down to this section, which only requires 10,000 in escrow for if you can't get insurance. And then again, having a third-party requirement for that escrow account, and then noting that this escrow account, as well as the cessation of operations escrow account that's in Rule 1, may be dispersed only in accordance with guidance issued by the board, and that guidance will be forthcoming, but that's just to make sure that there's a clear understanding of when the escrow accounts can be accessed.
So I think one thing we've all talked about is decreasing the cessation of operations escrow. But that happens in guidance, just as a reminder.
That's right. Okay, so we have a number of changes to the warning labels. First change is to the health warning label, and I will note that there's definitely going to be further input on this, as Julie's talked about. When we were working on this before, we are required to consult with the Department of Health. We will be getting more input from them, I'm sure, on this piece. That has to happen still. So this is, I'd almost say, a bit of a placeholder, but it is a sort of an initial proposal for how the health warning might change. It's a bit shorter, as you can see.
It's half as long,
Half as long.
almost exactly.
And then a couple more points of clarification on it. When there's multiple layers of packaging, the label must appear on the base layer. And it does say, yeah, so it says up here, no smaller than 6-point font, but if you do go down to 6-point font, letters should be capitalized, must be capitalized.
We change the health warning and people have like 10,000 units with pre-printed with that warning. Is there
We can use the waiver provision to just say that if you already
use your existing inventory?
exactly, yeah.
Figure it out. I think
There could
folks
be a
are
runout
struggling to
period.
fit that big label on their
Yeah, right.
packaging, so I would expect some folks.
And just of note, all this came from the ASTM guidance
great.
that they're working on.
In the ASTM, it contains cannabis symbol as well.
They
Something?
did,
It's
it
like yellow,
was
right?
yellow, yeah. And we did not go with that one, although we
We can ask
certainly
the
could now.
Department of Health, I
Yeah.
feel like.
So this looks different, but it is actually almost all the same. It was hard to read. It was in an image. The directions for how to put these warnings were in little images beneath the warnings. And so I just pulled them out of there and put them into normal type. A little bit easier to read. There's one change in there where the word optional had been included when it really wasn't supposed to be there. That's the only substantive change. Everything else is the same. Added some clarifications here that these two warnings both need to be on the marketing layer of packaging, and then this one adds the words "and pets." This change is an interesting one. There's been a lot of confusion around advertising, especially around social media. And this change just specifies, say, eliminates this prohibition on any other images or text regarding products. This is purely like, excuse me, I might just go get some other cough medicine.
Should we pause for a minute? or
Sure,
two?
why don't we just, what do you think, like 3-minute break? Is that
Yeah,
right?
sorry for my infirmity here.
No, that's all right.
That's
We'll
all
come
right.
back at 2:00. All right.
All right. Let's see how this goes. So,
It's 2:00, by the way. Back.
oh, sorry. Yes, thank you. But the one other thing I just want to note on the social media accounts, it's important to remember that all the other advertising restrictions do apply to social media. It's not like there's any elimination of that stuff. It was just this extra piece creating a lot of confusion. And I'd say that even internally, there was a lack of clarity. And so eliminating it and just relying on the other regulations around advertising made sense. This
Quick
piece here
flag
really,
up, David,
Quick
really quickly before you go much further. You'll have to reshare your screen. I popped up the meeting break image, which I think pirated screen sharing. You'll unplug and replug.
gotcha.
Thanks, Nelly.
All right. How's that looking? Hopefully that's
Looks good.
great. Thank you. This piece here is really just a grammatical thing to make it agree with the sentence at the top, but no substantive change there. This is a substantive change. There's been a prohibition on retail establishments co-locating, but this does allow for co-location for retailers if a retailer is providing mentorship or accelerator program for another. So product licensing is what the statute calls product registration. So there's going to be some confusion about this. We can figure out how to deal with that issue. For now, the rule will use the statutory terminology, and we can figure out how to clarify that that's what we're talking about. This is in case there are unanticipated changes in terms of new license types coming out, just saying that the board will establish security requirements for those license types if that happens. This clarifies the one location rule for all establishments. And again, this is really in the nature of putting on paper how the board's been interpreting this. And we're just continuing to use the 2 abutting span rule. So as long as your establishment is within 2 abutting spans, that will count as a single location. This does add a requirement that for cultivator packaging that will be packaged for consumer purchase needs to include the license number and process lot number, the cultivator's license number and the process lot number. This just instead of naming the license types that a sample could go to, it just says another licensee. There are still some statutory limitations on how flower and products can be sort of transferred through the supply chain. That may or may not change in legislation, but this is just to make sure that there's no more limitation on that under the rules, and legislation may eliminate it entirely, but we didn't want to have that limitation in the rules. Just samples should be able to flow through the supply chain in a way that makes sense for whatever commercial reasons. We did add this. It is currently the case and will remain the case that cultivators who can obviously continue to grow some plants for personal use, just as anybody in the state of Vermont can. We wanted to clarify how that should operate when you're also running a licensed operation. So we have here, a cultivator may grow cannabis for their personal use in accordance with the law that allows them to do that. Any cannabis plant grown for this purpose must be specifically designated by the cultivator such that a board designee can readily identify which plants are being grown for personal use if the plants are at or near a cultivator's physical site of operations. Physical site of operations is itself a defined term that basically just says, where your establishment is, where you're actually growing the plants for the market. If they're not near there, then it doesn't really matter. But if they are, you need to designate them. No plant grown for personal use may supply cannabis to the regulated market, and cannabis grown for personal use must not be entered into the inventory tracking system. So a couple changes here to the manufacturer packaging. Again, we're adding in license number and process lot number for packaging that's going to go to a consumer. Also adding a couple more warnings here. So warning specific to solid concentrates. Use with caution. Exceeding recommended serving size can have severe adverse effects. Vape oil cartridges. Use with caution to avoid overconsumption. Start low and go slow. And then a new subsection related to disposable vape pens, which will prohibit the use of disposable vape pens. So disposable vape pens or other disposable vaping devices are prohibited. Disposable vape pens are all-in-one pre-charged vape pens that are not intended for multiple uses and that can be used for e-liquids, oils, extracts, or distillates.
So this section here, this is packaging requirements for intra-supply chain?
No, so intra-supply chain is up here. So intra-supply chain is much less onerous. We can go back to 2.2.9A.
That's all right.
And on the pre-charged disposable vape pens, this is something that I know was brought before us when we originally wrote our rules. Then it kind of got lost in the shuffle of everything we were trying to accomplish last year. I've had a number of people ask me about them as we've opened. I think it fits with the culture of our packaging and what we're trying to accomplish. That disposable vape pens, most are plastic, some metal, but they're they're thrown away quickly. And if we can reuse those batteries as much as we possibly can, I think it's better for our waste systems.
Right. And yeah, just to remind, per Pepper's question a second ago, just to remind everybody, this long list is for packaging that will ultimately be the packaging that a consumer sees when they purchase a product. Intra-supply chain packaging is much more basic. Those requirements are in 2.2.9. Same change as before here, just clarifying that samples can go to another licensee instead of naming the specific license types. This is just a clarification. Section 2.5.1 said that all doors have to be locked at all times, which obviously doesn't make sense for a retailer. So just noting that retailers can have unlocked doors to the extent necessary to allow customer access. Just change the title here to make it clear that it's not all age verification in this section. There's a couple things about personal information at the bottom. I don't know why that changed. Let's see. So we didn't previously have a sample section for employees of retailers because under the original legislation, retailers couldn't do packaging. That has changed. They can. So in accordance with that change, to make it all even across the playing field here, retailer employees can access samples just like employees of other license types can. I changed this to display samples just because there's a lot of confusion about people thinking that consumer samples were about handing out samples directly to consumers. That really wasn't what was intended here. This was about like having samples in jars that people could view or smell. I don't know if this makes it any better, but hopefully it's a little less confusing. And then just putting in that clones will be, the board will have some regulations about that, but we're going to do it by guidance. A number of changes have happened to the testing section. And again, these is very much in the nature of a lot of the changes, as I've talked about before, where we're really just trying to put into rule how the board has been applying these rules already. So the flow chart that started this all out has changed significantly. A lot of it will be explained in guidance, as that second sentence says. So you'll see a very, well, to those of you who have been working in this isn't a new flow chart because this is the flow chart that is in our guidance. It is quite different than the chart that was previously in this rule, but it is not new. It is the one that is in the guidance and that's being sort of followed and applied by our compliance team already. And this is the old deleted, almost entirely eliminated. There is one note that I think is repeated in here, which is that testing for other contaminants may be deemed necessary at the board's discretion. Moisture parameters, they're not, although the specifics are deleted, they're not being eliminated. We're just moving them to guidance in the same way that we put in guidance almost all the other parameters. And this is essentially just a restatement of what was already there, which is that pesticides have to follow, use of pesticides has to follow the rules that are already in force and have been adopted and are maintained by the Agency of Agriculture. Just noting that labs have to maintain their certification there. This is really a technical change just to make sure this section agrees with the change in Rule 1 that says that sometimes we aren't going to require a full renewal for changes in control. And then I'll finish it out and then come back to this waiver provisions piece. The only other change here is just shortening this time for where the board will basically deem that a local control commission has made a decision in terms of, and the board will deem local control licenses have been granted if they haven't heard anything within 45 days. That could go longer if there is clear communication about a process that's occurring around the local control licensing. But if there's really no communication at all, it'll be a 45-day time period.
Have we had any issues with that to date? What are there, like 19 local control commissions or?
There has been a lot of confusion generally around the local control process. I don't think the timeline has been a particular issue. So let's go back and did we want to do this one too, or were there
I mean,
fewer?
it may be generally good practice if my colleagues want to look at this one as well, to just see
Sure,
if this is what we want to, I didn't have any suggestions for changing this particular piece.
I know a lot of these, or at least a couple of these were energy related. It's important for everybody listening here that on re-licensure, if you're an indoor cultivator, a lot of these energy waivers will go away and you need to start thinking about that. I think we'll be in communication with those folks in the near future. I don't know. I don't really have a strong feeling either way if we want to keep some of these waivers in for folks in year one who might be a new like indoor cultivator, or do we think we've moved as a critical mass enough folks over to kind of asking folks to start their indoor grow without these waivers? I don't really have a good answer for that at this point in time, but I don't know if I want to change anything today. It's something we can consider as we move through this process.
I don't think, yeah. Like I said, I didn't have any of these that I specifically thought we needed to look at, but generally good practice unless.
I'll just run through them then,
Yeah.
and if something pops into your mind, you can say something. So this first one is just the standard operating procedure manuals. We're saying that doesn't have to happen for tier 1 cultivators. Oh, whoops. So that one, 2.2.4 A, B, and C had some exemptions there.
I think those are fine.
Yeah, I don't know any.
Yep.
Go to 2.2.5. B 1 and 5. So yeah, exempting them from some of the procedural requirements here in the cash handling.
Yep, makes sense.
Or sorry, the training.
Again, folks are looking to move up tier. I think it makes sense to have our tier 1 folks thinking about those things in light of getting smarter as business professionals, but see the need to change that.
Yep.
And I think this was J, right? Yeah, so this one was really saying that, look, if you're a tier 1, I think the idea here was that a lot of these are going to be sole proprietors. It's not possible to have transportation happening, and also it's going to be one person doing it. To allow some flexibility around staying close to the vehicle. 2.3.2. This is a ways down. This is 2. Okay, so another just protocol exemption there around the safety call. And again, doesn't exempt them from all the other pieces of that, the visitor thing, just saying that the written protocol isn't necessary. And then this whole section was exempted, for home occupancy businesses.
And that's still.
Which I think is just gonna be the case, but
Yeah.
as I understand it. 2.5.6. B and C, and then this is what Kyle, I think you were talking about earlier. Around some of the energy requirements, and this is for B and C for these. And that's it. So unless there's any other stuff, those are all the waivers, tier 1 waivers.
I think we're good. Thank you.
All right. So that's rule 2. And then we only have one other rule. We're gonna hold on rule 3 because there is a good chance that the legislature is really gonna revisit the medical program. So there was like really minimal changes that had come up for rule 3. So it made more sense to wait on the legislative action and then rework rule 3 as necessary to be in compliance with whatever the legislature may do this coming session.
Yeah, I mean, I think all the changes that folks may want to see with the medical program, and I think we, to some extent, want to see with the medical program, need to happen through the legislative process, not
Yep.
really through our rule.
We're bound on rule 3 also by that. Whatever we do with the medical program can be no more restrictive than the pre-existing rule. So
Right.
unless that changes, there's not a lot that we can do to rule 3.
That's exactly right. We are largely stuck on rule 3. I think, and yeah, another reason to let the legislature make some changes and perhaps reconsider that or define that in a way that makes more sense. And the board can figure that out. So there's actually only one change to rule 4. So I'm not going to scroll through the whole thing. I'm just going to skip right to the single change, which is that we are putting in rule the administrative appellate process. And this refers to the process that happens if somebody disagrees with the final decision of the board and wants to appeal it up above the board. So basically, we make a bunch of decisions, have a lot of authority to do that. But if somebody doesn't like one of our decisions, there is a mechanism to ask a higher authority to check that. And the legislature said that the way that's going to happen for the board is that an administrative appellate officer is the one that's going to hear those appeals initially. So this is the process by which those appellate appeals will happen. The other state entity, or one of the other state entities where this happens, is the Office of Professional Responsibility, and so we really are hewing closely to the rules that they use in adopting this. And I should also note and clarify that these processes are in force right now. This is the process that will be used for any appeals that are currently have been noticed with the executive director and are going to be ongoing in the coming months. They've been adopted as a matter of policy by the board, but we thought it made sense to just stick them in the rule as well to make sure that there's sort of maximum clarity about what the process will be. And I won't read through all of that. It's not particularly exciting or relevant to the actual business of running a cannabis establishment. But these will be posted in probably within the week, and you can read through it if you're curious. And that's it.
Awesome.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Okay. Just a final reminder that this is the very beginning of the rule amendment process. This is the very first step in it. We will take extensive public comment on any other rules that need to change or any of these proposed changes in the coming weeks and months. But why don't we continue down the agenda? Bryn, if you have the recommendations for licensing.
I do. Okay, so here is this week's register for the adult use applications and the patient program or the medical program also. So this, the data that is being shown in this register is for the last 2 weeks since we missed a board meeting. We skipped a board meeting last week for the holiday. So starting with the medical cannabis program in the last 2 weeks, we received about 300, a little bit over 300 renewal applications. I'm sorry, 170, not 300. 170 renewal applications, 61 patient applications, issued 150 patient cards. This is basically on par with the number of applications that we've been receiving in the last several weeks. So it seems like big numbers, but since it accounts for 2 weeks, so it's about the same as what we've been getting each week. Medical staff are processing applications received on and after October 28th. So we are very nearly within our 30-day window. Move on to the adult use license applications data. Put it all on one page. In the last 2 weeks, we've received about 35 new employee ID card applications and 7 cannabis establishments. And those 7 applications, 2 of them are for manufacturing licenses, 4 of them are for small cultivation licenses, and 1 is for a retail license. And speaking of retail licenses, here's our list of the location of retail licensees and applicants for a retail license that are in the queue. So we've gone up, this total number has gone up by 1 in the last 2 weeks. The latest applicant for a retail license is in Burlington. So that increases our total number of retail licensees and retail applicants in the Burlington, in the city of Burlington to 8. So a little flag for the board. And also today we issued our 25th retail license. So that's a good milestone. I will move on to our list of recommendations for a cannabis establishment license. As always, these applicants have demonstrated compliance with all of the requirements for their license that are set forth in statute and rule. So this week we have Highly Rooted applying for a Tier 2 manufacturing license. Bliss Point Chocolate applying for a Tier 1 manufacturing license. Tier Nanog Edibles applying for a Tier 2 manufacturing license. Green Queen Incredible Edibles applying for a Tier 2 manufacturing license. The Tea House applying for a retail license. Bordertown Apothecary applying for a Tier 1 manufacturing license. Sleeper's Garden applying for an indoor Tier 1 cultivation license. And Cambridge Cannabis Company applying for a retail license. That is your group that the staff is recommending for approval for licensure this week. New license amendments in the last 2 weeks. And we do have 1 new social equity applicant in the queue as of this week.
All right. Any questions for Bryn? Nope. All right. Is there a motion to approve the staff recommendations?
I move that the board accept each of the recommendations as presented to us by staff in this meeting.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Great. All right. Great work. Let's shift to public comment. If you'd like to make a public comment, join via the video link, please just raise your virtual hand and we will do our best to call on you in the order that you raise your hand. Then we'll move to people that join via the phone. Alice, do you want to get us started?
Yep, hi. I guess I have two comments, just that I picked out. I'm not sure how concerned I am about these two things yet. The first thing that I'm a little concerned about is the allowance of lighting for outdoor cultivators. Extra lighting so that they can have it during a time where they want to keep their plants in the right, I'm gonna say format, but that's a computer term, in the right place for cultivation. One of the things in my town, Waitsfield, is that have some significant lighting requirements and ordinances and regulations. And the select board, the planning commission, and residents in general are concerned about light pollution. And this is one of the things that was talked about immediately with indoor cultivation. We have a botanical vegetable grower here that has quite a significant indoor cultivation. It's in like the type of um, um, structure that it really lights up at night and causes light pollution. And it's really a talking point. So one of the things we'd be concerned about moving forward is how much more light pollution or lighting that this requires. We also, because of this, have some strict regulations on the brightness of lighting allowed, the lumens, and the type of lighting required. We require downward facing illumination. And that type of illumination can wind up being more expensive for the user than just putting up lights, any kind of lights in general. So that's just a comment I wanted to make on light pollution and allowing more outdoor lighting. The other one I'm kicking around in my head now is the water and wastewater um, letters that you're now going to require that I guess it's mostly going to be growers that would have enough water for their growing. Our our cultivators are going to be out in our ag res district where we don't have public water utility or a public wastewater utility. So that's not something we could accommodate anybody who's cultivating in our ag res district, and we don't plan on bringing those services there. In our business district, looking at the location of where our businesses are going to be, they're all on the public water utility. So our water commission could accommodate them. They're probably going to roll their eyes at me when I tell them they need to do this for the user. But I just wanted to make that comment about water and wastewater. Moving forward, yeah, I don't see any cultivation happening anywhere other than ag res where there are no utilities. So I guess they would need to go to the DEC permitting for that to see what their water capability and or wastewater capability is. And that's it.
Yeah, thank you, Alice. It's always nice having someone with some municipal background tuning in to help us think through these things. We will certainly take those comments under consideration.
Okay.
Dave.
I'd like to start by thanking Dave Scher for his service to the stakeholders of the cannabis community. I was really sad to hear that Dave found a really great job that's even better than this one, and he'll be missed. Bye, Dave. Really enjoyed working with you.
Cat's out of the bag now, Dave.
Well, I mean, you posted his job, so, you know.
That's true.
Lots covered today, and, you know, we'll definitely get you lots of comments once we have some time to review the red lines. But some things that come to mind as kind of high level and big impact. As you make any changes to packaging, you know, packaging has been labeling has been really hard for a lot of licensees. And a lot of licensees have invested heavily in purchasing packaging and labels that comply with your current rules. And it would be, I think, unfair to make them throw away their existing inventory. So as you're thinking about changing those things, and look, I mean, the health warning is not good. So it needs change. But as you think about, you know, changing those things and adding new terms, you know, previously the health warning had to be in the marketing layer. Now it has to be on the interior layer, you know, when this rule goes into effect. That you allow people to use things that were produced prior to the effective date of the rule change, or even the publication date of the rule change, right? So that we're not, you know, you're not incentivizing us to go and rush in a bunch of orders in advance, right? But you know, there have been tens and tens of thousands of dollars invested in complying with your existing labeling rules, which are difficult to comply with. Also, adding the words "and pets" to the 10-point font bold disclosure may make it difficult to fit that thing on many packages. Come to the shop. Let me show you some packaging and how it's already difficult to squeeze all this stuff in. So making that line in particular longer is problematic. And the thing about disposable vapes, I'm not surprised, you know, given the position the board has taken on, you know, sort of the environmental impact and the plastics ban. It's certainly consistent, and it's not surprising. But these are products that are sold in Massachusetts. They will be sold across the lake in New York. They're popular products. They're convenient products for tourists. And you know, you're putting some of the retailers, especially in border communities, at a significant disadvantage. And I think your licensees in places like Bennington and Brattleboro are in particular going to be hurt by this. They're already struggling to compete, or will be struggling to compete as they get open, with their Massachusetts existing Massachusetts market participants that you know, don't have the 50 milligram per package limit, don't have the plastics ban, and are able to sell vape products. So just please give some thought to that and the economic sustainability of market participants, particularly, you know, in border communities. More to come in writing. Thank you very much for all your work. And again, thank you, Dave.
Thank you, Dave.
Chris.
Hi guys, Chris Preston from Cambridge Cannabis Company. Just wanted to take the time to thank you for what you guys do and appreciate everything. So looking forward to you know, jumping into the legal market. Thank you again.
Thank you. Congrats.
Tiernanog Edibles.
Hi, this is Rob from Tiernanog Edibles. I just wanted to jump in and say thank you for issuing us our license today. I really look forward to working with everybody here. And while I'm at it, I'd really like to second what Mr. Silberman said about the changes to packaging. And you know, I know for us personally, it's like a 5-week lead out anytime we get something printed. And honestly, it's tens of thousands of dollars at a time, and it would really, really hurt us in our growing business if we had to toss all that to get new stuff printed. But that being said, thank you so much for everything, and look forward to working with all of you.
Thank you.
Congrats.
Anyone else who joined by video, just feel free to raise your virtual hand if you want to make a public comment. And if you join via phone, you can hit *6 to unmute your phone if you'd like to make a comment.
Ernie is first.
Hello. I just have a question about the document that you guys opened the meeting with today. Specifically, just the line about agreements and cultivators being allowed to make an agreement, such as putting their label on for them. Is that a financial agreement? And if it is, will the CCB be issuing any guidance on how a separate financial licensing agreement should accompany a cannabis transaction? I'm just curious about, as a manufacturing applicant, like I'm going to be applying for a manufacturing license, and typically, you know, doing ice water extracts, it's toll processing by strain for the cultivator. And generally, the cultivator wants that product back because the concentrate is a direct representation of the flower that they grew. And you can say that about gummies that, are made by preserving terpenes, and, you're running with strain batches and stuff. So I get that based on legislation, the cultivator's not allowed to possess this. But I'm curious, like, if the cultivator and the manufacturer enter an agreement where the manufacturer is going to sell that product for the cultivator and then pay them on the back end based on what they were able to sell it for, is that legal? Because the cultivator is technically earning off of the sale of a product that they're not allowed to possess or sell. I'm just like, how does this work out where it happens cleanly for both the cultivator, the manufacturer, and the retailer who is the final, buyer within the industry? I don't know if you guys have given this any thought, and how easy it would be to just allow the cultivator to carry product from flower that was cultivated by them, since everything's already tracked and traced. I know that, there's a lot of room for like commentary like this in terms of rule change coming up. So I hope to be able to give further input. And I know a lot of cultivators are kind of like, the expectation was they would be able to transfer product back to the cultivator from the manufacturer, and that's not the case. So how can we facilitate this for small cultivators that do not have the possibility to get a wholesaler license or a manufacturing license since they're operating out of their houses? I'm also mainly thinking of outdoor cultivators who now are like in a rush to sell all of their flower as quickly as they can because that product kind of expires as quickly as it's the fastest to expire. Whereas, if they were farmers for meat, for example, they would send the meat to the butcher and they could freeze the meat and sell it throughout the rest of the year, etc. I really appreciate you guys listening to this, and I hope that there is room for discussion, and I'm hope to see you guys internally discuss this just to consider the effects that this has on specifically tier 1 cultivators and outdoor cultivators. Thank you.
Thanks, Bernie. Yeah, we'll keep this conversation going, especially as the legislature comes back into town and we are amending our rules to see what makes the most sense.
Austin.
Hi, yeah. I find the guidance documents really helpful, and I thank you for those. And I was hoping that We could get one on the product registration process and like expectations and timelines and stuff like that, just like the application was. All right, thank you. That was my comment.
Thank you. Anyone else with a public comment? Just either hit *6 to unmute your phone or raise your virtual hands.
Bobby.
Yes, thank you for all you guys do. I have a simple question, kind of a high level. We hear about New York being flooded with flowers, and I know you're giving out a lot of cultivation tier ones. And are we concerned about being over flooded? I mean, when is our stopping point? I don't know if we have any. I'm just a little concerned about entering the market where there's so much going, being produced already, and maybe there isn't a market for mine.
Yeah, thanks, Bobby. Anyone else? All right, I will close the public comment window. Just on that last point, I would just say we do have a very sophisticated market analysis tool that's available on our website for download. It shows what the supply and demand is likely to look like based upon our current number of licensees. You can plug that in and see how that changes. There's a lot of adjustable assumptions that are in that document where you can change things like, market share of edibles or flower and see how that affects price points and things like that. So I would encourage anyone who has the patience to deal with it to download it and play around with it and see how the people that we're licensing might affect the supply and demand and the price of cannabis.
Most complex Excel sheet I've ever had the privilege of playing with. But I think we're in pretty good shape in the market.
Yeah. So David, I forgot when we were in that section of our agenda if we wanted to vote to pre-file.
I think you should vote to yes. And just to clarify again, in case it bears repeating, it's just like this vote is simply saying you approve these initial proposed rules and you think they're ready to be pre-filed with the amendments you discussed around the rule waivers in Rule 1 for Tier 1 cultivators. And I'll make those changes as you discuss them. So I'd note that when you make a motion. And then this will give me the go-ahead to pre-file and start the process.
And then the pre-file process, you don't have to give me the exact timelines, but that's an initial filing, and then there's a public comment window. And then we make amendments based on those public comments, and then we file with.
That's exactly
ICAR.
right. Yeah, that's the summary.
Yeah. Okay.
And there's a couple filings that happen, and then that public comment period opens, like I was saying before, probably late January.
So then is there a motion to pre-file rules 1, 2, and 4 with the amendments shown today and discussed in our meeting?
So moved.
Seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, that's it. And I think I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you all for joining, sticking with us, and we'll see you next week.